Understanding brings certainty, control, and power over your own life. And when you can have understanding for your own imprint and what happened to you, you have so much of a better chance in life having certainty and control.
This is how we feel like we have control over us and our future. The more we know about ourselves, the better decisions that we can make, and the better we can show up for our life and the people that we care about. Hey everybody, it's Bianca.
Welcome back, Evolvers. It's Emilia. So today we have an episode that's going to be all about trauma imprint. And I want to just make sure that I put it out there for anyone that's joining us that's a new listener. A trauma imprint isn't something that we might think it is. You know, when I've spoken to people about this, a lot of people that are unfamiliar with trauma might quite literally have a idea that comes into their mind that is the scars that they have or a physical imprint. When we talk about in this episode a trauma imprint, it's far beyond just that quote unquote surface level. So Bianca, I was on a client call yesterday and I want to share something that I heard come from this client of mine, and it was really interesting and you'll know why. But for lack of better words, she was reprocessing the last 2 weeks, and it was, to use her words, a shit show of a 2 weeks, and, work trips, life, lots of stuff. And she had gotten into an argument with an ex-partner who they'd been trying to go back on and off for some time now, despite the conversations that she and I have had, and noting that it wasn't the best idea. Now, she had said verbatim.
Those are always fun.
Always fun. She said verbatim, we ended up, at the end of the week, we ended up having a really big fight. And the way in which I responded in that fight that we had, I felt, Emilia, I swear to God, I felt like a 3-year-old girl. I went back to a 3-year-old version of myself. And I totally lost all control. And in reflection, you could see that she was sharing this story with a lot of shame and a lot of disappointment and a lot of frustration with herself, and going to the narratives of why does this always happen? And obviously in that moment, there was a lot of extreme and heightened emotions. I don't want to say extreme, more heightened, because she was reprocessing a really difficult moment for her, and a moment that brought her back to a very difficult time in her life, likely around 3 years old, that had a lasting impact on her, that continuously comes up and out when it just so happens to be relationships that don't go her way, intimate relationships. And I have a really big heart for this person, and a really big heart for anyone that's been in a situation like that, where they have been in a relationship, be it intimate or not, and you say something, you do something, you go somewhere, and on the other side of the emotional trigger or the behavior that ends up happening, unfolding, you're literally looking back and you have so much shame about how you behaved, how you reacted, what happened there. And you're kind of left in this daze and confusion of, why did I act that way? How did I get here? What led me to believe in that moment that was okay? And now I'm talking, this person is in their late 20s and they're not 3 years old. They're cognitively able to process what actually happened. But the saddest thing is that this person in that time had no interest and no desire to actually truly understand what happened. And it was far more comfortable for her in that moment to just rehash the facts than it was to actually go near the emotions that got so big and so overwhelming for her system, and getting down into that memory. And Bianca, you and I have talked about this on our platform quite frequently, how a lot of us who navigate life and who are maybe in the chair of the person on the other side of, receiving help, receiving support from a coach, a therapist, whomever is, their guide. It's hard to look in the mirror of what ultimately, your life ends up becoming, or those little moments that mean a big, big deal to you that have implications and lasting implications on the trajectory of relationships that matter to you. And looking at that mirror is not the most comfortable thing. And so we went through a whole series, and I'm not going to go into that, but I wanted to open with that story because when we started in the kind of later half of the session, digging into the emotions, what she shared with me, she said, ultimately, and kind of brought her to why that happened. I used the analogy of the emotions that you're experiencing. I had her name. She named over 12, 15 emotions. I said, I want you to visualize you driving a truck, right? And I want those emotions to be in your mind's eye like marbles. Each emotion or each marble represents an emotion and a thought, aka a feeling. And that marble can be as small as, your pinky finger or as big as it feels, because she said, I would rather die than feel these emotions. And it's like, whoa, that's a really, really big statement. And when we get in the underpinnings of the psychology, the weight of these quote unquote marbles, these emotions, these feelings feel so big and unbearable to her system that it doesn't feel like she can actually process them. So we went through a technique to help her slowly process each marble, and kind of a visualization that helped her to recognize how she can navigate when those emotions come, when they're overwhelming. And we've been here, a couple of different times, and she said this one really helped her. But why I want to share that is because this woman's trauma imprint, again and again, we find evidence that shows her what really did happen when she was young. And the biggest concerns that we hear again and again come forward, and we try to share this, is when we don't understand what our trauma imprint is, when we don't understand what happened to us, when we're not actually willing to have the tough conversations to process what the imprint of our emotional, physical, sexual, whatever it is, mental experiences, we cannot change or have certainty or control that we deeply crave about our life, with our relationships. And that becomes a problem. That becomes impacting us. And so it's really important to understand our trauma imprint, because not just of the lack of control that you might feel in your life, but also because there's such a better way of living when you do.
That must have been so devastating for that client to really see the differences between like who she thought she was and the responses that she thought she was capable of having, compared to what actually happened and what was actually coming out for her. And this is something that we see all the time with clients. It's like they think that, and we've been there too, but it's like they think they're so much further ahead and they have so much more control than they really do. And we have this narrative going on of like, I can handle things. I can do hard things. I know myself. I know myself so deeply, until challenge comes. And then you revert. And all of the work that you didn't do, and all of the emotions and the thoughts and the feelings that you were suppressing, finally come out, and you're hit with that oh shit moment of, oh, I guess I didn't handle this as much as I thought. And what happens with a lot of people is that just further puts them into another shame spiral. And then the avoidance cycle just continues even more and more and more from that point. Can you, for everyone listening, can you give a definition of what a trauma imprint is, and then how people can start actually like identifying that for themselves and what that actually looks like?
Yeah, absolutely. So the way in which, when I was undergoing training or with my trauma certification, was the trauma imprint is described as not just after the event. Like, everyone will have a traumatic experience. And when they have a traumatic experience, the traumatic imprint, although it's not like a clinically acclaimed term, it's this term that's used to describe the before, the during, and the after lingering experiences that you have as a result of that traumatic experience. So for example, this person, I'm going to use another example. So someone who might have experienced a traumatic event, like a parent dying, right? And very tragic, parental death, maybe let's say at 11 years old, and let's say it's in the fall. That person, like picking up the phone call and hearing that their parent got into a car accident, that moment was a snapshot in time. That was the traumatic moment. But there was a before that her or his brain really captured. Like, I was driving on the road, the leaves were turning, they were turning colors, and then I got the phone call and I had to pull over. And then after I witnessed it, it was all the lingering effects in the aftermath of that traumatic experience, really hearing the fact that their parents are never going to be accessible again. And all of that memory, all of those sensory somatic experiences become the lingering effects of that traumatic experience, meaning the next time that person drives down that road, maybe they'll avoid it. The next time they unconsciously see the leaves turning at the same time of year, their body goes through this really big grief cycle. They might unconsciously hate the phones and hate phone calls because it reminds them, their associative memory reminds them of that traumatic experience. And so that now the lingering emotional, psychological, sensory experiences of that traumatic event becomes the imprint on their mind, body, soul. And that is the lingering effect. So when we talk about a trauma imprint, it's the lingering sensations internally and externally, if you will, that remind us of, not just cognitively, but somatically, experientially, of that trauma that we experienced.
It's where the concept the body keeps the score come from. You have these significant situations that happen in your brain and your body without your awareness really store the emotions, the memories, the experiences, what it felt like. This is why there will be a lot of times where you won't have a memory of something, but like a certain smell or a certain song or a TV show or even the taste of something can trigger it. Or a lot of people, they won't remember something until they're under the influence, and then it comes up again because that's when they had that initial instance happen. Our brain stores memories and data in really weird and interesting ways. And it's really cool from a theoretical standpoint, but when you're actually living it and you're trying to process trauma and memories that you can't actually get a hold of, it can be really scary. And then the idea of, oh my God, I'm going to work with a therapist who's going to actually help me to pull those out, or a coach. Every single part of you is like, hell no, I am
Yeah.
not doing that. I'm not going anywhere near that. And to what that initial client said, I'd rather die. I'd rather die than have to feel this because I don't want to have to feel this.
Yeah. And the thing with a trauma imprint is, to that end, it's not just the experience of that imprint. It's, again, it's the lingering after effects that we don't feel as though our system can handle. And that's where, when we experience trauma, it's not just the trauma. It's not what happens to us, but the data shows that when we can experience trauma and then be able to talk about it or share it with someone, or even have someone hear our story, we can help reintegrate what actually did happen to us in a way that actually lifts the quote unquote burden of the trauma, right? You can create meaning out of your story and out of whatever experiences you had gone through. However, it's the person who experiences trauma that doesn't know how to work through or cope or adapt or feels like they can share about their traumatic experience and their imprint that actually ends up getting those stored even deeper in the cells. So when this client says, I'd rather die, that's a huge showcase of how little belief she has in her own abilities to actually have her system process emotions. And what we got through in that call, like processing the emotions to where she won't go into a dorsal collapse state and just relived the traumatic experience again and again. So in real time, not only are you cognitively trying to avoid re-experiencing your trauma by, not wanting to go to or process it with a therapist or a coach or someone who can help you, or even a friend, right? Not even wanting to talk about it. But on a sensory somatic standpoint, your body is saying that's cognitively expensive. Why? Because we're literally going through in our brain a simulation that then impacts our body, right? And when we look at CPTSD and PTSD, or even just the lingering after effects of a traumatic experience, right? Think about that person that I talked about with not wanting to drive and whatnot, like those that tax the central nervous system. The imprint lasts longer because we're not actually processing through, be well, we're not
Thank you.
processing through what is coming up in our body. And so understanding our trauma imprint, I personally believe, and I believe this to my bones because I have experienced the benefits, it can be so empowering. And that empowerment comes with having the courage to work through the really big discomforting feelings and emotions that come up when you even recall, if you can, when you even experience the sensations, the triggers, the cues, the physiological symptoms that come up about your trauma. And those who avoid it have, Bianca, you and I were talking yesterday on our IG Live. There are some serious implications of not ever addressing those lingering effects of your traumatic imprint, because when you experience trauma, it rewires and reorganizes the brain, right? And how the brain, specifically in brain matter, increase, decrease, how it works, like that impacts how your body works too.
I said this to a client this morning because she's having a hard time processing. So the anniversary of her mother's death is coming up next week when you and I are recording. And this is always a really hard time for her. And she came into the session and said, how do I process my emotions without letting this completely derail me?
Mm.
And what I said to her was, you have to not be surprised when the hard emotions come up, because you are actually processing it and you're not running away from them like you typically do.
Yeah.
The reason why we struggle with our emotions, it's not the emotion itself, it's the emotion we have after the emotion. So it's like
Correct.
you have a primary emotion and then you have a secondary emotion. So you have the primary thing that happens, maybe it's worry or panic or anxiety, whatever. But then you also have this secondary emotion that comes up after that. Maybe it's humiliation or shame or fear or mistrust or powerlessness or whatever. And most of us are reacting to that. It's the secondary emotion, not the first one. So when you can, and this is what I said to this client, I said, when you can learn to not be surprised by the fact that you're going to have these feelings, then you won't have such a shock. You won't necessarily maybe have these secondary emotions, and then you'll actually be able to process it and it won't completely derail you. But don't be surprised if it does, because the reason why most of us end up with these really lingering traumas and experiences is because of the amount of avoidance that we have to them. So the more you avoid, the more your body learns this is dangerous. So when it comes up again, you avoid again. And then you end up in this doom loop of feel, avoid, don't feel, even further
have
scarcity.
That first feeling magnified.
Yeah. And then it just goes in this death cycle. So if you can instead, and Emilia, I know you have a couple of things that we're going to suggest to everybody listening, but if you can tell yourself and tell these parts of you to not be surprised when these feelings come up, actually embrace them and acknowledge them as a reality, rather than telling yourself a narrative, I'm not supposed to have them, that's going to help the healing process that much more. Because you're not deepering the narrative that these emotions are bad, but it gives your brain the chance to understand, what is this and what do I do with it? Which is what our brain is constantly optimizing for and trying to do.
It's like, I don't want to feel it. And if I feel it, I'll die. So even thinking about that will send me to an even bigger panic and avoidance cycle so that I don't feel it. And then I feel even more fear about thinking about that. It's just like, a complete toxic cycle that we get ourselves into when we don't actually, again, we say face the mirror, do the work, et cetera, et cetera. But these are the 3 things that you can do. So number 1, hopefully by the time that you've gotten to this point in the episode, you understand why you specifically in your beautiful one life that you have need to understand your trauma imprint. I know far too many people who don't even believe that they have any trauma, and I'm going to invite you into the frame of, if you have a brain, then you have experienced some degree of trauma, and I'm going to invite you to explore that thought. And to that end, if you don't want to explore the thought, let's explore 3 things together. And here's why. Because when you explore these 3 things, you're going to start to have way more of an insight into your life and how you're responding or how you're reacting and how you're spending your money or how you're spending your time or how you're spending your energy in this world every single day. And it's because likely how you're reacting unconsciously to your trauma imprint. And I know far too many people who are operating without any consciousness, just running away or avoiding their trauma imprint instead of actually taking the reins of their own life and feeling that level of certainty and empowerment and control over their life. So 3 things. Get a journal out or a piece of paper. And if you're, in the backseat of a car or whatever, go ahead and type this into your phone. So number 1, let's observe what our triggers are. So Bianca and I mentioned a couple of different experiences, right? I'm going to use the person whose parent had died as the example because I really observed that. So number 1, what are the triggers? So I mentioned, maybe roads that are windy, roads that have trees on both sides, trees that are turning colors, shade of red, shade of orange. Maybe it is phone calls, right? So maybe you get triggered every single time a phone call's coming in, and you notice that every single time there's a phone call that comes in. This is where number 2 comes in. Understand and journal down what you're noticing. What are the physiological sensations that are happening in your body or the emotional reactions that you're having? So for example, you see the trigger, you see someone calling on your phone. Immediately you notice your heart rate starts to speed up, or you start to get hotness in your chest, or you feel like you want to run and you want to not answer the phone, or you want to ignore it really quick. The emotion that you might attune to if you're writing this down and if you're noticing and starting to track the triggers and the patterns might be panic. It might be an immense wave of grief. It might be anger. What are the body's patterning and symptoms? What's showing up in your body or your emotional state? And then number 3 is understand what is the response to that reaction, to that emotion, to whatever comes up for you. And I know that sounds really, really basic, but Bianca and I have talked about thought records on this platform so many times. And the amount of people who actually have done them have been quite literally by coercion to do it because it's going to be great for you, because all jokes aside, but genuinely by the loving guidance in a session. But if you did this just simply even on your own accord, you would be able to understand what are your triggers. You would be able to understand, date them, time them, notice that there's certain patterns there that your body is literally signaling to you again and again. And when you can understand the pattern, and when you can understand what your body, your mind, your heart, whatever, your reaction to that pattern, you then can now put yourself back in the driver's seat. And instead of having your entire body or your stress response system take total control over your life in that circumstance, cue the client story that I shared earlier, who just went back into a 3-year-old version of herself, freaking out, you actually can control your life like the adult, like the person that you want to be. And to use another client's words, to actually stay in the seat of the character that I aspire to have and show up with on the day-to-day. And I find that there's so much glory in that. So 3 things. Number 1, observe the trigger. Number 2, journal down the pattern of your body's reaction or your emotional reaction and the symptoms that come with that. And then number 3, understand what is your body's go-to reaction to that. Is it fight, flight, freeze? Do you notice yourself wanting to get up and run, or do you freeze up? What is that? And those 3 things will help you understand where your trauma imprint really is. And most importantly, also where it's not, where it might not be taking control of your life.
Very well said. What is your episode suggestion?
My episode suggestion is 412. Being an adult doesn't mean you have grown. And you?
429, how to not feel like a mess about yourself. If you've been struggling with this, and if you've been struggling with the people around you, like they're not growth minded, they're not into therapy, they don't really care about their mental health. This is why we created Evolve Venture Society. We have well over, how many people are in that group now?
300.
400 people in that group now.
Mm-hmm.
We have at least 300 people, other people in that group who are growth oriented, who care about getting better, who want to be around other wonderful humans. And the connections that have been made in that group are seriously amazing. So if you've been struggling, you can't find your people, Evolve Venture Society is a really good place for you to dip your toe in and to actually feel seen and connected with others. The link is in the description below. We cannot wait to have you there, and we will see you next time. Bye, everybody.
Everyone.